So let's start with our next presentation and warmly welcome Dr. Angelo Dalli, CEO of Omni, Director of Helio Gaming, Director of William Hill, and General Partner in 111 Holdings and Ventures, who will talk about AI architecture with functional causality inherent to the architecture. Angelo has founded 9 startups, was involved in 4 IPOs and M&As, and invested in over 40 successful companies in the technology, entertainment, and fintech industries. Angelo is a fully accredited member of European Business Angels Network, a senator representative of World Business Angels Network, and of course, the president of Business Angels Malta, where he's from. He has twice been named as Malta's Top Entrepreneur of the Year in 2014 and 2019. In his research and development role, he has authored over 23 conference papers in Europe and the US, focusing on the application of AI, natural language processing, and search engine technology to a number of industry verticals and domains. Angelo has filed over 20 AI patents in the US and globally and invented a new architecture for neurosymbolic AI. So it's my pleasure to invite Angelo to the studio. Hello, Angelo.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi.
You seem a man of many hats. Just by reading your description, I could say you're a busy man. So are you using any kind of AI application to schedule your work days?
Not yet, not really. It's still old-fashioned Outlook. But yeah, I've been in AI for many years, and since I got into AI quite early on, when it wasn't such a hot area, people were telling me, why are you into AI and what are you doing? So I was doing different companies, different startups, and doing my investment journey while waiting for the data, for the hardware to actually catch up. And now we're here, we can actually see that AI, the modern wave of AI, is here to stay and going to continue impact our lives. So I'm happy to be here at AI Boost and to talk a little bit more about now what I'm doing in cause and effect.
Great. So we're super to have you here, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you. So yes, thank you for the introduction. That was pretty comprehensive. I've been in AI for many years. I programmed my first neural net way back in 1997, when AI was considered to be more of a toy example architecture, especially neural nets. They were not taken that seriously in the beginning. I saw there was also Professor Schmidt-Huber, who was also speaking at the conference, who has done a lot of the groundbreaking work on neural networks, especially in time series and modeling sequences. So a lot of the work has been going on for many years. And the algorithms for AI have not really changed that much fundamentally from how they were in the 90s and early 2000s. And even though there have been incremental improvements, I think most of the improvements that we're seeing is through the availability of data, through the availability of hardware that is fast and processing a lot of data very quickly. And so this led me to think, with the hindsight of the experience, both creating commercial applications and also authoring academic papers and also patents in AI, and thinking, okay, what are the main limitations of AI? How can we overcome them? And one of the main limitations that I have been noticing and identified early on is the area of trustworthiness. How can you trust the AI if you cannot know how the AI is coming up to an answer, and it's just giving you an answer without explaining how it actually got to that answer? You're not going to trust it. We need to have an AI model that can actually have all the modern benefits of deep learning, of having all the benefits of adapting automatically to data, adapting automatically to what is happening, and yet, on the other hand, being able to explain what is going on. While on this journey, I realized very early on, around 4 years ago, when we started creating this new architecture for AI called neurosymbolic AI. And what is the meaning of this? Neurosymbolic means that we take a neural network, which is based on connections of weights from different weights and edges, and it combines them together to produce an answer. And together with symbolic reasoning, i.e. in form of equations, in form of rules, more how people actually reason and think about the world. And so through this journey, I realized that there is something very crucial missing in modern machine learning and data science, and which I realized, in fact, makes data science not a science at all unless it is added. And this is the element of cause and effect. And unfortunately, it is something that has been largely overlooked in most AI systems until very recently. I have been very happy to see the element of causality, of cause and effect, being discussed more and more in the last 2 years or so. I have been a long-time follower of Professor Judea Pearl, who created a lot of the foundational structural logic behind effectively being able to handle cause and effect mathematically. And let me explain a little bit about cause and effect and how it affects the usefulness of future AI systems, which I believe have to implement this in order to be fit for purpose. So once in the world, when you are explaining something, you obviously start explaining by this is the output, and this is the chain of events that has led to this particular output that I have observed, that I am trying to produce as an answer to the input query, to the input to whatever question, to whatever query I'm asking to the AI model. And when we think about it, most people reason in terms of chains of causes and effects that have been observed from that particular cause. There are two ways of doing this. One is taking the cause and moving it forward to the observation and making the link between the cause and effect. And there is another major branch called Abductive Logic, in which you take the observation and then you try to match it to a cause. This is typical in diagnosis systems. For example, in medicine, you're observing an effect, a disease, for example, and you're trying to find the symptoms of the disease, and you're trying to match it with a disease in order for them to be able to recommend the interventional action to give, in this case, for example, medicine to treat the disease. And most systems actually work in either of these ways. Most practical problems can be split down into these. And also, when you think about cause and effect, there are many different things that can be done. One of them is called interventions. So if you look at there is this thing called the ladder of causation, in which we have 3 levels. The first level is called association. Association is basically all of statistics, and most of deep learning, most modern AI systems are based on statistical pattern recognition. And that is kind of the basic level, which is rung 1. And unfortunately, most AI systems are stuck within the boundaries and the confines of that particular level. And this is a very harsh theoretical level, which means that deep learning, no matter what is added to it, cannot actually overcome these limitations. These are not limitations that will be overcome by an increase in hardware or by more data. It's just an inherent hard limit to how much the AI systems can actually express, can actually handle. Then there is the second level, which is called interventions. Interventions, when I intervene as part of the process, I say, okay, let me set the value of this particular variable to a particular range of values, for example. In the medicine example, to continue with it, if I give a particular medicine to a patient, what happens? Does it change the outcome? So whenever you're trying to change the outcome, bias detection is also, and mitigation is also a form of example of interventional approaches to cause and effect. Then there is the third level, which is called counterfactuals. in which you do kind of like what if scenario analysis, in which you try to say, okay, if I set the value of this variable, or if something has not happened, or in this particular context, let's imagine a particular world, what happens then if the context is different? So mostly, to explain it simple, the level 3 is concerned about contextual changes and handling that contextual change. And this is the architecture that I have created, and my company, Unai, has created, is actually handling this particular context, the context of the cause and effect, and also applying sort of imagination, new worlds that are created by setting different scenarios and seeing how it affects the outcomes. And this is in fact very important, because when we are applying it to modern everyday problems, this is often the case that apart from doing simple things like classification of, say, images and objects, which is kind of can be done always at level 1, if you want to do something that is a little bit more useful, you have to progress to this level 2 and level 3 systems. And this is what one of the main, really big problem that we are solving through the use of neurosymbolic AI. And I believe that the future of AI systems is going to be firmly held with neurosymbolic AI. One of the other main advantages of having also symbolic knowledge that can be used by AI systems is that people can also then give back knowledge. They can check exactly how the AI system is working, because you cannot check and understand how a system is working if it is a complete black box that is unexplainable and you don't know what is happening. So once you do know the purpose and function of each and part of the model, then you can go and say, okay, this is the AI, this is where the AI is correct, or this is where the AI is not correct. And thus you'll be able to actually correct it, give feedback, and say, okay, parts of the AI output can be automated and can be handled by the AI. Part of it needs to be de-automated, and maybe, in some cases, ask a human, get more data. And this is, I think, what the concept of what we're calling collaborative intelligence, the process of collaborating, and cause and effect is a key enabler of this collaboration, because this is how people tend to collaborate. And I'm very excited about the possibilities of being able to model cause and effect in AI. Apart from Judy Appel's model of causal logic, there are other forms of causality logics that exist. Some of them are used, for example, in environmental and earth sciences to model, for example, the cause and effect of weather patterns, like grandeur models and so on and so forth, which have been around for quite some time. Economists also have been using this to some extent, and I think this is something that will be more and more seen in the near future. And we also have concepts that have been around for a long time from game theory. As you know, games have been one of the main drivers and inspiration sources for AI, especially early on. And game theory can actually be applied in conjunction with cause and effect methods in order to produce better results. And finally, one of the main aspects that also concerns us a lot, that I've been putting in a lot of thought, is how to make AI handle the real world. Because in the real world, when you think very deeply about it, all of physics is also based on cause and effect. We are effectively the effects of one Big Bang moment that has created the entire universe. And there is a long chain of events that has led to this present moment and will continue leading to the future. But on a more practical level, every type of experiment, every type of any physical process that you're observing is effectively a chain of cause and effect. And being able to have an AI that knows that if I drop something, it's going to fall to the ground, without having to have it learn all that completely from the data. I think having such a model that we can just immediately tell it, here's the equations of general relativity, for example, off you go, assume that they are correct, and now interpret the data. I think this is going to make sure that the AI can be more useful and also useful in a faster way, and thinking more along how we also reason about the real world. This leads us to also thinking about what is common sense in everyday life. What are the things, the minimum things that an AI needs to know in order to not come up with strange explanations? Because if I'm explaining something and the AI needs to explain something to a person, it needs to know what are the normal assumptions that a person makes in everyday life. And so there is a lot of work to be done there. There's a big body of work on this so-called knowledge priors. And this is an area of active research, in fact, on how to make explanations that are closer to how people actually look at. I look forward, in fact, to seeing this. It's a relatively new architecture. We've been spending 3 years now filing patents on it, and inventions quietly just coming out of stealth mode, and right now submitting scientific publications about it, and seeing how it's going to be applied in different industries, and how this may revolutionize the way that future AI is done as we add these capabilities of causality to AI, and breaking the barriers of deep learning, making it fit for purpose for applications that are more interesting than what we are already applying it to now. Thank you very much. I think now there's some Q&A session.
But I'm intrigued in other part of your personality. You act as an investor, as an active angel investor. So maybe you can share some of your insights. Which areas of AI has the biggest potential to skyrocket?
Yes, I think that currently there is a lot of interest, obviously, in narrow applications of AI that focus on one particular task. And I think this is still an area that has a lot to be exploited still. I think most of the low-hanging fruits on automating tasks that are, say, take a human just a few seconds to do, I think that has been pretty much exploited already. And I think people have started creating a lot of these applications. I think we're going to see applications that are automating more complicated sequences, more processes as a result. I think that anything that maybe does not involve that much the human soft skills of interaction, for example, I think that is going to be going down the way of being automated by AI. But I do feel that when it comes to creativity, when it comes also to choices that affect human lives, I think this is where AI will change in order to become more trustworthy. So I think trustworthy AI is going to be a big new area. And as I said, cause and effect and explainable AI, I think is also going to be a hot new area. And currently I'm focusing, in fact, all the angel investments that I do in this particular field.
So what startups need to do to get your attention?
Yeah, I think whenever this is pretty generic. I mean, I've been doing this for over 18 years now as the angel investments. I always look at the team. I think this is the one of the, of course, the idea has to be good, but I think, apart from the idea itself, almost as important, if not even almost more important, is the composition of the team, the track record of the team, the level of commitment, the complementarity of the skills of the founding team, and their ability to execute at the end, because there's the commitment. Unfortunately, I think a lot of startups in the beginning realize very quickly that there isn't going to be much of a social life for the founding team, and there is going to be the ups and downs in which they have to be very resilient, very nimble. To take a small analogy, I always say that the most successful startups need to be very nimble like a cheetah, but they also need to be very resilient like a cockroach almost, that actually runs and is capable of withstanding all the attacks that come to it. And I think this is very important, the cohesiveness and the persistence of the founding team in face of the self-doubt that always happens, the problems that startups face. And I think it's an exciting journey to do that. So I always encourage people to get their entrepreneurial spirits going and go for it.
And let's get back to our main topic, AI, making predictions about what humans are going to do. I believe there is not a big secret that we as humans, we believe we are the most unique in the world. But are we predictable creatures? And AI can easily make guesses about what we want?
Well, unfortunately, I think so. Especially when you see the behavior of groups of people, maybe on an individual basis, it is more difficult to be able to do this kind of predictions. But once you take a group dynamics level, it is surprisingly predictable, especially if you match one person kind of behaving the same as a group of related people. It's pretty predictable, in fact, of what people will do next. And this is why social media platforms, marketing, AI actually works, because it does actually predict what you want to do. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And again, this is an area where cause and effect will be very, very helpful. For example, sometimes you see adverts on things that you've just searched recently, but say that I'm searching for a particular place to go on a vacation, and often you still see adverts even after you have been to that place. A little bit of common sense in the AI would obviously tell it, okay, you have actually been to that place, like stop showing adverts related to somewhere that you've just been to. Like this little common sense adoptions in AI will help us also get better recommendations and maybe break out of the filter bubble in which AI maybe filters out the experience a little bit too much. I think adding that little bit of randomness, that little bit of element of unpredictability and surprise, I think will keep us human rather than just automatons, which is something that me as a very passionate actually person working in AI, I advocate a lot the need to actually keep humanity in view, creativity in view, together with the technological advancement.
As you say, we have to remain humans and sometimes make our own choices. So, what do you think of such products, such startups that are trying to predict what's going to change our lives? For example, finding a partner on Tinder instead of you.
Yes, I mean, it is pretty surprisingly easy sometimes to actually manage to find matches with people, and it may say a lot about humanity actually that an algorithm can suggest this successfully. I think that I don't think that there is any AI is going to replace the human connection anytime soon. I think that you can get recommendations, and you may find like common interests and all this. I think it does work just because if you do have a common interest to someone, there is a higher likelihood that you're actually gonna click with someone. But I think that this is an area where AI is gonna have a lot of work to do in order to do it really, really well. So I find that some of the recommendation systems out there can be based on quite shallow assumptions. And the fact that these shallow assumptions actually work is, I think, more indicative of how people actually behave rather than the AI itself. So I think that it's going to be always interesting. And one thing that I do want to avoid is to have over-reliance though on AI recommendations and too much control. For example, what we see with this social scoring systems is something that I think society, especially for example in Europe and elsewhere, I think we need to push back to ensure that it is not overdone, because I think there is a level beyond which if AI has too much control, I don't think it's also a healthy thing to have.
And as you're very much closely related to the gaming industry, I'm interested to learn. So, what are other aspects that you are still looking at for further development? Causality is one thing, but maybe you still face certain challenges that you would like to put more focus on?
Yes, I mean, it's always at the end, the AI systems need to generate revenue. Some of the most successful systems that people use, for example, search engines, still at the end sell advertising. So that is their core revenue generation model. And you need to have the AI that is practical and generating something that's providing a useful service that people are going to pay for at the end, or somehow you're going to provide it for free, but you're going to have someone else, in this case, the advertisers, that are actually paying for that service. I think that in the gaming, this is just like any other industry, basically, that is trying to match consumers with products and services. So most of the recommendations, most of the way that the AI can audit, can evidence, can recommend things to people and explain it is pretty much the same across multiple industries. It's just obviously then customized that particular to the particular jargon of that particular domain. I think an area where AI can, specifically in gaming, can really get us into something completely new is in the area of esports. Which I believe is going to be more and more increasingly a hot topic, and something that is providing us more entertainment actually as time goes by. And this concept of the metaverse that has been bandied around pretty recently, it's an old concept, by the way. The metaverse has been around in sci-fi literature for a long time. I think I can imagine a future where it's not like the Matrix, but where people do spend more and more time in these virtual worlds, interacting with their avatars, interacting with other people. And who knows, it may be a different experience than for example, from having Zoom calls, being able to interact more closely with the other person, and at least giving more semblance of actually being there, even if you're not physically present. And this is, I think, very exciting, being able to interact with other people, and also being able to interact with AI characters in the future.
But if we have to talk about a bit broader industry, from gaming to general businesses, tech businesses, now we see that startups are scaling so rapidly. So how can AI help them to understand why are they growing? Which direction should they target more? Or maybe what are the success factors that they are already applying?
A very good question, actually. I think that AI is as a technology enabler, a startup enabler. I rarely have come across startups that are just purely focused on AI, the so-called deep tech AI companies, because it is harder to do. So most of the time, it is AI being used to disrupt a particular function that already exists, or in rarer cases, to actually create an entirely new product. I think one of the best examples is the gig economy, in which you have all the likes of Uber, Bolt, and all these companies that are delivering services basically, and the schedule is being run by an AI. Effectively, we have people working for an AI algorithm. And I think this is where in the scale-up part, I think AI is going to help by making the processes more efficient, by helping also the infrastructure deployments to be more optimized. There is this thing called MLOps, and which I think is also something that will become more and more common. And it's actually becoming easier to set up this kind of stuff. You need less IT people to actually maintain infrastructure. You can use really good tools to do product level ready deployments of technology. Cloud computing is obviously always becoming more sophisticated. And I think also AI will help startups analyze patterns, analyze customer behaviors, predict them better, and thus help them in their scaling up efforts.
So as you founded 9 startups already, are you working on any new idea right now?
No, right now, Umnai is my 9th startup. It's been taking up a lot of my time, or most of it. So right now I'm focused on that. It's interesting, because a lot of people ask me, why have you done 9? Aren't you fed up of it? The truth is that as a serial entrepreneur, after each exit, you do kind of take a little break. But at the end, the entrepreneurial itch comes back, and you end up wanting to do something else. So, it has been an exciting journey, actually. And currently just focusing on AI, making sure how we actually create the new architectures for the future, making sure that AI in the next 10 years, how is it actually going to look like? And I think being in a position to influence that, to actually create the technology, especially at the base level, that is going to be then people are going to take it and apply it in so many different ways. I think that is exciting and also useful at the end to actually produce.
But what would be the core focus of your startup? Do you put a lot of focus on research and development? Are you actively scouting for talents worldwide? Or maybe you have some other secret sauces?
Yes, so basically we're focusing on this trustworthy AI, on this new architecture for AI that handles explainability, that handles trustworthiness. So that is the key focus actually, and doing it in different application domains. How do you apply it, for example, to autonomous vehicles? How do you apply it in medicine? How do you apply it in regulated industries? How do you apply it in different areas that impact human lives? So that is the key focus. How do we make sure that AI impacts human lives more positively in a more trustworthy way? And that is like obviously a huge area of contact in different industries. So it's gonna take us a number of years to disrupt these steadily as we go by. We're always on the lookout for talent, obviously, and this is something that can be very, very deep since you're creating the base tech stack. So you need to make sure that other people can build on top of it. So it requires very dedicated, almost obsessed people with AI to build up. But obviously every team needs a complementary set of skills. So there's always room for everyone who's passionate about AI and its applications.
But did the recent years change your company's culture in anyhow? So many companies became global. This work from anywhere approach, was it always part of your agenda and how you went to see your company? Or maybe you adopted some really good practices?
Yes, definitely. So a part of well, in a way, this all this Corona lockdowns and the pandemic has actually helped in a way because it has forced us to adopt a remote working style quicker than I think we would have actually done otherwise. So and I can see that I don't think that anyone of my team and a lot of other companies wants to actually go back to the way that they were working before, like completely always from the office. And so I think this is very exciting because the hybrid work models, maybe meeting sometimes face to face and doing a lot of work remote, can be applied to a lot of industries. Maybe not so to those that manufacture stuff. I think they need to be physically present. And there are some things that I think AI needs to address a little bit better, and even remote work. For example, when you're networking with people and conferences, for example, it is more difficult to meet new people that you haven't known or that you don't know actually are listening really there. If it's just a list of participants, I think it makes it more difficult to actually interact. So I think that is something that may take longer time to actually fix. But I feel that overall, we have designed it, and I would recommend every startup to design actually the work processes to be remote first, because that is also lets you scale up the talent pool much faster. Unfortunately, there is a lot of demand for people with talents in AI. Well, fortunately, I guess. But unfortunately, there isn't enough supply of people who have been trained. And a lot of people in AI actually are pretty fresh graduates that do not have that much experience in actually applying it. So it's a chicken and egg situation. I think it will actually get solved over time. And I have seen this in the past, like 20 years ago in the search engine technology industry, when people with search engine skills were really rare and far and few in between. Nowadays, you'll find a lot more people who actually know how a search engine works, but back then it wasn't. So I think it's gonna take, always there's that like 5-year period when people actually adapt because they just need to study, get experience, and so on and so forth. And you can see that in AI particularly, there is now like this new like generation of people who have had maybe like one major project under their belt so far. And then there are like people who have been in AI for far longer, like me, for example, that then you will have like 10, 20 years in AI. And slightly older people actually who have been doing it also in the 90s and 80s. So there's like that gap in the middle, which I think corresponds to the so-called AI winter, which we've heard about.
Yeah. So, Angelo, thank you very much for your time today. We are at the end of our time. So, thank you for sharing your thoughts, and that has been an insightful discussion.